"You have no power here," said the council. The human disagreed. The doors had not fully opened when the first voice hit me. "The petition is denied." I had not even reached the speaking platform yet. I had not introduced myself. I had not said a single word. The Council of the Interstellar Compact had rejected Earth's application before I could draw a proper breath inside the grand chamber of the conclave. I kept walking anyway. The chamber was enormous. It was the kind of enormous that is deliberate, designed to make every visitor feel like an insect crawling across a dinner plate. The ceiling was so high that the upper rows of council seats disappeared into a faint amber haze. The floor was a single slab of dark polished stone that reflected the light of 3 artificial suns burning in the upper arches. My boots made a small, clean sound with each step. One sound, then another. I counted them to keep my breathing steady. There were 47 species represented in this chamber. 47 delegations watching me walk to a platform they had already decided I would leave empty-handed. I could feel their attention the way you feel a temperature drop. It was not hostility exactly. It was something colder than hostility. It was indifference wearing the costume of ceremony. I am Yara Solis, Earth's diplomatic envoy, appointed after 2 previous envoys came home with polite rejection letters and deeply unsettled expressions. I am 39 years old. I have spent 11 years studying alien political law, xenolinguistics, and the full recorded history of the Interstellar Compact. I can read 7 alien scripts and speak 4 alien languages without a translation aid. I earned this appointment by being the most qualified human alive for this particular, painful job. None of that mattered to the council. I was human. That was the beginning and end of their assessment. The speaking platform was a raised disc of pale stone, 6 meters across, positioned at the center of the chamber floor. A single standing light illuminated it from above, the way a spotlight finds an actor on a stage. I stepped onto it and placed my datapad on the small ledge at its edge. I looked up. The council speaker was Sethkal of the Vorthon delegation. The Vorthon were among the oldest species in the compact, predating human civilization by roughly 40,000 years. Sethkal had 9 limbs, a central body the color of charcoal, and 3 sets of eyes arranged in a triangle above a speaking apparatus that could produce sounds across a range no human throat could match. He was ancient in the way mountains are ancient. He watched me with the patience of something that had seen 1,000 small things come and go. "Ambassador Solis," he said. The translation feed in my earpiece rendered his voice as a low, unhurried tone, like a stone being dragged slowly across another stone. "Earth's petition for compact membership has been reviewed. The Council's determination is that your species does not yet meet the threshold of civilizational maturity required for full membership. This is the 3rd such determination. You may submit again in 50 of your years." 50 years. 50 years to a Vorthon was probably a short pause between thoughts. "With respect, Council Speaker," I said, keeping my voice level, "I would like to present Earth's case directly before any determination is finalized." "The determination has been finalized," Sethkal said. "You were informed of this before your arrival." I was informed of a preliminary finding. The Compact's own procedural code, Section 4, Article 2, states that any petitioning species may address the full Council in open session before a denial becomes binding. I am exercising that right. A sound moved through the chamber. It was not quite a murmur. It was more like 47 different species making 47 different small sounds of surprise and irritation at the same moment. The translation feed gave up trying to render it and simply flagged it as negative ambient response. Sethkal was quiet for a moment. His 3 sets of eyes converged on me with something that might have been new interest, or might have been the before look of a thing deciding how to remove an obstacle. "You have 2 minutes, he said. 2 minutes? I had prepared for 20. I took one breath and began. Earth achieved faster-than-light travel 14 years ago. In the 6 years before that, we ended our last global conflict, not because we were forced to, not because of external pressure, but because a coalition of nations decided collectively that the cost of continuing was greater than the cost of change. We did that ourselves. We have since reduced our atmospheric damage by 60%. We have eradicated 11 diseases that had claimed lives continuously for centuries. We have a functioning, unified diplomatic corps that represents every nation on Earth, which is something we have never had before in our entire history. I paused for exactly 1 second. We are not perfect, we have never claimed to be. We are young, but we are not dangerous, and we are not going away. The 2 minutes ended. Sethkal lifted one of his upper limbs, a gesture that the translation feed identified as formal dismissal. "The determination stands," he said. "You have no power here, human. Return when your species has demonstrated the patience of ages." The chamber laughed. 47 species in 47 different ways found that funny. The sound was layered and strange, and it filled every corner of that enormous room. It bounced off the dark, polished floor and came back to me from below as well as above. I did not leave. I walked to the diplomatic waiting alcove on the east side of the chamber floor, a long stone bench set against the wall, used historically for delegations waiting to speak. It was technically considered a part of the chamber floor. It was covered by the compact's hospitality protocols, which meant that no one in this chamber could compel a diplomatic representative to vacate it by force without violating their own foundational law. I had read about that provision during my preparation. I had spent 3 weeks confirming that it still applied, that no amendment had quietly removed it, that it was not a theoretical protection but an active one. I sat down, I opened my datapad, I began to read. The laughter faded. The chamber went quiet in a way that felt different from before, not indifferent, uncertain. As Sethkal looked at me across the chamber floor, I looked back at him. I did not smile. I did not need to. The security protocols activated. A soft chime sounded through the chamber speakers. The compact's automated systems identified me as a non-member presence in a member space and began the formal removal process. I had already filed a procedural challenge to that removal under Section 12 of the Compact's Visiting Rights Charter, citing the hospitality protocol directly. The challenge would take a minimum of 6 hours to process. I had 6 hours. I opened the Compact's full legal archive on my datapad, went to page 1, and started reading from the beginning. Outside the chamber's high-arched windows, the gas giant turned slowly in the dark, vast and unhurried, completely uninterested in the small drama playing out above it. I understood how it felt. I kept reading. They came for me 4 times in those first 6 hours. The first was a security officer, a tall Drenathi in formal gray, who stood in front of the alcove and informed me in careful, translated tones that my presence was a violation of chamber protocol. I showed him my procedural challenge filing on the datapad screen. He looked at it for a long moment, consulted his own device, and walked away without another word. The second was a compact legal clerk, very young, with luminous amber eyes and a nervous energy that translated across species lines without any difficulty. Her name was Ush. She told me that my challenge was under review, but that I was creating considerable disruption, and perhaps I might be more comfortable in the visitor reception areas on the station's upper level, which had better seating and a functioning food dispenser. I told her I was comfortable where I was. She lingered. I could tell she wanted to ask something. I waited. "Why are you doing this?" she finally said. Her translator rendered the question in a flat, precise tone that didn't carry what I suspected was genuine curiosity in her original voice. "Because I have a right to be here," I said, "and because someone should use it." She left. She came back twice more that day for reasons that were technically official but felt personal. The second time she brought a small folded square of something that turned out to be a very thin thermal layer, like a compact blanket. The chamber got cold at night cycle, she said. She put it on the bench beside me without waiting for a response and walked away quickly, as if she hadn't done it. I noted that. Humans are good at noticing things that people do when they think no one is watching. The third visitor was a Vorthon subordinate delivering a formal written notice that my procedural challenge had been reviewed and dismissed. I filed an appeal within 4 minutes, citing a different subsection than the original challenge. The appeal would take another 12 hours to process. The fourth was Sethkal himself, which surprised me. He came alone, no retinue, moving across the empty chamber floor in the quiet of what the station's systems called night cycle, though no actual night existed this far from any star. He stopped in front of the alcove and regarded me with 2 of his 3 eye sets. The third appeared to be watching the far wall. I was not sure if that was intentional. "You intend to stay," he said. "Yes," I said. "You will not achieve anything by staying. The Council's decision was not made lightly. Your species has a history of rapid escalation, of conflict, of instability. We have watched you for decades. The determination reflects that observation." "I know," I said, "and you're not entirely wrong. We have that history, but history is not destiny. If it were, the compact itself wouldn't exist. 3 of your founding species had histories of conflict far longer and far worse than ours before they chose something different." His speaking apparatus moved in a way that the translation feed could not render. I did not know what it meant. Possibly nothing, possibly everything. "You have read the founding histories," he said. "I've read everything," I said. "I have a lot of time right now." He left without responding. I watched him go, then looked back at my datapad. I was on page 342 of 4,000 years of compact legal history. I kept reading. The days began to blur in the way that days do when the structure of a normal life is removed. There was no sunrise and no sunset on the conclave station. There was a lighting cycle, programmed to mimic a 26-hour day, and I synced my sleep to it. I ate the ration bars I had packed in my travel bag, supplemented by items from the food dispenser that Ush had mentioned. The food dispenser on the lower level required a compact member identification to operate, but the one in the maintenance corridor 2 sections over did not. I found that on day 3. The compact staff began to treat my presence as a fixture. The security officers stopped approaching the alcove. The legal clerks routed my ongoing procedural filings through the standard queue without comment. I existed in a strange middle space, neither member nor removed, present but officially unresolved. Ush came by every day. Sometimes she brought small items, a cup of hot liquid that tasted like tea from a planet I had never visited, a translation dictionary for an older form of Vorthon legal script that she mentioned casually she happened to have a spare copy of. She asked questions. Careful ones at first, then less careful. What was Earth like? What did humans do when they were not working? What did our food taste like? Whether it was true that humans could go without sleep for days if they needed to. That last one I answered honestly. Yes, if we have to, though we are worse at everything when we do, and we generally prefer not to. She laughed. The translator rendered it as a short harmonic sound. It was, somehow, recognizable. I told her about the valley in New Mexico where I grew up, where the sky at night was so dark and so clear that you could see the arm of the galaxy spread above you like a road going somewhere worth going. I told her about my first year at the Diplomatic Academy, where I failed my xenolinguistics exam twice before I understood that I was trying to learn alien languages the same way I had learned human ones, which was completely wrong. I told her about the day I was appointed as Earth's envoy, how my mother had cried and my father had gone very quiet for a long time and then said, in a very small voice, "Please don't let them be unkind to you." Ush listened to all of this with her amber eyes steady on my face, and her hands folded in the particular Drenathi posture that I had learned meant deep attention. "Your father sounds like someone who loves you very much," she said. "He does," I said. "He worries, that's how he shows it." "The Drenathi have a word for that," she said, and told me the word, which was long and required a slight tonal shift that my human vocal cords could only approximate. "It means loving someone so much that you carry their danger inside you as if it were your own." I wrote the word down. I said it back to her as close as I could manage. She smiled. At least, I was nearly certain it was a smile. On day 9, a junior member of the Tharaki delegation, one of the smaller species, 7-limbed, with a habit of hovering 6 centimeters off the ground at all times, stopped in front of the alcove and asked if I was the human who had filed 41 procedural challenges in 8 days. I said yes. He said his delegation found that impressive. Not officially, he added quickly. Officially, the Tharaki delegation had no position on my presence. Personally, he thought it showed a certain quality that the compact could use more of. I asked his name. He said it was Riv. I told him mine. We talked for 2 hours. He had opinions about compact procedure that were, frankly, fascinating and probably things he was not supposed to share with an outside party. I did not point that out. On day 12, I reached page 1106 of the legal archive. And then I found it. I almost missed it. It was tucked inside a subsection of Article 7, placed between 2 longer provisions about trade rights and navigation law, as if whoever had drafted it had expected it to be relevant for a very short time and had not wanted to give it too much prominence. It was 4 sentences long. I read it once, then again, then a third time very slowly, making sure my translation was correct. My heart was doing something unusual, not fear, not quite excitement, something older than both of those things, recognition. The feeling of finding a door in a wall where you expected only more wall. I sat very still on the stone bench in the quiet of the chamber and read those 4 sentences again. Outside, the gas giant continued to turn, vast, patient, unaware. I began to smile. "Oosh," I said softly to no one since she was not there. "I think I need to see the council." I requested a floor addressed the following morning through proper procedural channels. The request was initially routed to the secondary review queue, which had an estimated processing time of 30 days. I filed an emergency elevation citing direct legal relevance to a standing council ruling. That required a response within 48 hours. The response came in 26. I was granted 10 minutes on the chamber floor. I walked back to the speaking platform for the second time. The chamber was full again, all 47 delegations in their places. Seth Call in the speaker's position, watching me approach with that same unreadable expression he had worn the first day. Riv of the Tharaki delegation was in his seat, hovering his customary 6 centimeters off the surface. Oosh was at her clerk's station to the right, her amber eyes tracking me as I stepped onto the disk of pale stone. I placed my datapad on the ledge. I looked up at the full council of the Interstellar Compact. "I want to thank the council for this time," I said. "I will use it as efficiently as I can because what I have to share is brief and does not require explanation. It only requires reading." I pulled up the document on the datapad and connected it to the chamber display. The 4 sentences from Article 7, Subsection 12 appeared on every screen in the room simultaneously, rendered in standard compact script and in the native scripts of the 6 founding species. "This provision," I said, "was written into the Compact's founding charter 4,012 years ago. It has never been amended. It has never been suspended. It is active law." I gave them a moment to read it. It states that any species demonstrating verifiable self-determination of conflict, defined as the voluntary, internally driven cessation of a civilization-threatening conflict without external intervention, cannot be refused compact membership on the grounds of civilizational immaturity. The provision is absolute. There is no council vote that overrides it. There is no petition process. It is an entry right, not a request. The chamber was silent. Not the silence of indifference. The silence of a room full of people realizing at the same moment that the ground beneath them is different from what they thought it was. Earth ended its last global conflict 6 years ago, I said. We did it ourselves. There was no compact intervention. There was no external political pressure from any spacefaring species. We have the full historical documentation. It is attached to this address in the chamber record. I looked at Seth Call. He was looking at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. I am not filing a petition, I said. I am not requesting a vote. I am notifying the Council that Earth meets the legal threshold established by your own founders. What happens next is not a matter of Council discretion. It is a matter of following your own law. I picked up my datapad. I will be in the alcove, I said. When your legal scholars have finished verifying, I am available for any follow-up questions. I walked off the platform. My boots made that small, clean sound again on the dark, polished floor. I could feel the entire chamber watching my back. I did not hurry. There was no reason to hurry. The Vorthon Legal Division took 3 full days to verify the document. They checked it against every known amendment record, every revision log, every secondary archive. They consulted 2 external legal historians from non-compact species who specialized in ancient compact law. They ran the original language through 5 different translation matrices to confirm that self-determination of conflict meant exactly what it sounded like it meant. It did. On the 4th day, Seth Call came to the alcove. He stood in front of the bench where I sat with my datapad and looked at me for a long moment without speaking. "How did you find this?" he said finally. "I read," I said. 4,000 years of legal archive," he said. "I had time," I said. "I have been here for 12 days. You gave me that time when you made me wait." His speaking apparatus moved in that untranslatable way again. I was beginning to suspect it was something like resignation, or perhaps something more complicated than any word I had for it. "The provision is valid," he said. "Our scholars confirm it." "I know," I said. "The Council will need to review the implications." "The provision doesn't require Council review," I said, gently but clearly. "It requires Council action. There is a difference." He looked at me with all 3 sets of eyes for the first time since I had arrived. It was a peculiar sensation, being looked at by 6 eyes arranged in a triangle, all of them focused and intent. "You are a difficult person," he said. "I am a prepared person," I said. "That is not the same thing, though I understand why it might feel similar from where you are standing." Another long silence. "The Council," he said slowly, "will be convening an emergency session to discuss the implications of Article 7, subsection 12, and its application to Earth standing petition." I felt something move through me that I did not let show on my face. Not triumph. Something quieter. The feeling of a key turning in a lock that you have been standing in front of for a very long time. "I appreciate that," I said. "I will be here." He left. I watched him go. Then I looked down at my datapad, at the page I had been reading when he arrived. Page 2043. Still more than halfway to go. I kept reading. But something had changed. The archive that had been a place of searching had become a place of understanding. Every page I turned now was not just legal history. It was the anatomy of a system I was about to become part of. Every old precedent, every forgotten amendment, every diplomatic agreement written in a language that no living species still spoke natively. All of it was now relevant to me in a different way. I was not reading to find ammunition. I was reading to understand the house I was about to move into. And in understanding it, I was beginning to see its rooms, its corners, its weaknesses, and its strengths, with the particular clarity of someone who has spent a long time looking at a thing from the outside, wanting in. 3 floors above me, in the council chamber, the emergency session was beginning. I turned the page. The vote was scheduled for the last day of the month cycle, 18 days away. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking, what vote? The provision is automatic. There is no vote. And you are right. There is no vote to admit Earth. The Compact's own law made that clear. But there is a vote to amend the law itself, and the Council had done the calculation and realized that if Article 7, subsection 12 remained on the books, they would have no legal basis to refuse Earth, and no legal basis to refuse any future species that met the same threshold. It was a loophole the size of a planet, and they intended to close it. The amendment process required a 2/3 majority. Of 65 current Compact member delegations, 44 had to vote in favor to pass. The Council's inner circle, Seth calls Vorthon delegation, the massive Keldras bloc, the tightly organized Moor Federation, and 2 others controlled 31 votes between them. They needed 13 more from the independent delegations. I had 18 days to make sure they did not get them. I could not vote. I was not a member. I could not speak on the floor during amendment proceedings. I could not attend closed sessions. I had almost none of the formal tools that a diplomat inside the system would have. What I had was time, a functioning datapad, a stone bench, and the fact that 18 days of being visibly, stubbornly, politely present in the Compact's own chamber had made me, in a small way, familiar. Familiar is a tool. Underestimated people know that better than anyone. I started with Ush. I did not ask her to do anything. That was important. I did not approach any Compact employee or delegation member and ask them to help me. What I did was continue the conversations we had already been having, and in those conversations, I was honest about what was happening and why I thought it mattered. The amendment is not just about Earth, I told Ush one evening, over cups of the tea-like liquid she had started bringing regularly. If they close Article 7, they are saying that a species can do everything right, end its conflicts by itself, develop responsibly, meet every stated threshold, and still be refused. Because the Council decides when enough is enough. That is not a law, that is a preference. Ush was quiet for a long moment. She was looking at her cup. The Dranathi have been Compact members for 800 years, she said. I know, I said. But we were small when we joined. There were council members who argued we were too small, too few, not significant enough. There was a provision in the charter that protected us. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. I talked to Riv of the Tharaki delegation again. And again after that. Not about Earth's case specifically. He was a junior member and had limited official standing. But about the amendment in general, about the philosophical question of whether a compact that changes its founding principles to suit present convenience is still the same compact that the founders built. Riv had opinions about that. Strong ones, delivered while hovering precisely 6 centimeters off the ground with his 7 limbs, in a posture that his translation feed described as animated and engaged. I talked to the clerks from 3 other small delegations who ate their meal period food in the maintenance corridor near the non-member food dispenser. I had become a regular presence there. They knew my name. They knew my situation. They were curious, careful people who asked thoughtful questions and listened to answers with genuine attention. I was not building a coalition. I want to be clear about that. I was not running a campaign. I was not making promises or deals or any of the transactional things that political maneuvering usually involves. I did not have the standing or the resources for any of that. What I was doing was being a person, consistently, honestly, openly. I was being a human being in a room full of people who had been told that human beings were a risk, and I was letting the reality of me stand against the idea of me, quietly, every single day. And I was watching. I was watching which delegations sent their junior members to speak with me and which did not. I was watching which council members attended the amendment discussion sessions and how long they stayed. I was reading the compact's internal newsletter, which was available to all station residents including non-members, and I was reading between the lines of its careful, neutral language with the particular attention of someone who had spent 11 years learning to hear what political language is not saying. On day 7 of the 18, Riv came to the alcove with a look on his face that his translation feed rendered as significant personal discomfort. "I am not here officially," he said immediately. "Understood," I said. "The Tharaki delegation is being pressured by the Vorthon bloc to support the amendment. The argument they are making is that Article 7 creates an unpredictable membership pathway, that it undermines the Council's ability to manage expansion." "What does the Tharaki delegation think?" I said. "The Tharaki delegation," he said carefully, "has not yet decided." I nodded. "Can I ask you something?" He hovered. He did that when he was uncertain. "The Tharaki delegation was granted compact membership 90 years ago," I said. "Under what provision?" He was silent for a moment. Then, Article 9, the threshold of significant discovery, we had developed a new form of energy transmission. And if, at that time, there had been a powerful bloc within the Council that wanted to close Article 9, to make discovery insufficient on its own, to require an additional approval vote, what would the Tharaki delegation have said? He hovered for a long moment. "I will tell the delegation leadership that we spoke," he said. He said nothing else. He drifted away toward the upper corridor. I leaned back against the stone wall. My back hurt. It had hurt for 5 days because stone benches are not designed for long-term human occupancy. I ignored it and picked up my datapad. On day 14, the Dranathi delegation quietly requested a procedural delay on the amendment vote, citing insufficient time for full review of historical compact law as it related to the provision in question. The delay was granted. It pushed the vote by 4 days. I had no way to know if that was connected to my conversation with Ush. I did not ask. I did not need to know. On day 16, 2 more small delegations, the Fethali and the Velmer, filed similar review requests. The vote was delayed again. On day 20, the vote finally proceeded. I sat in the alcove on the morning of the vote with my hands flat on my knees and my datapad off, for the first time in weeks. There was nothing left to read, nothing left to prepare. Everything I could do had been done. Now it was in the hands of 65 delegations sitting in a room I was not allowed to enter. I sat very still and waited. Ush found me there 2 hours after the vote began. She came quickly, her footsteps sharp and light on the stone floor, and she stopped in front of me and stood for a moment with her amber eyes bright, and her hands clasped together in the Dranathi posture that meant, as best as I had come to understand it, I am holding something carefully because I do not want to drop it. 34 delegations voted against the amendment, she said. The amendment needed 44 to pass. It received 31. I exhaled slowly. The breath went out of me like something that had been held too long. The amendment failed, Ush said unnecessarily, because she could see on my face that I had already understood. Then she said, more quietly, "The Council will be issuing Earth's formal membership confirmation within 72 hours. It is required under Article 7. I sat there for a moment more. The chamber was somewhere above me, full of 47 species processing something that had not gone the way they expected. Sethkal was somewhere above me, doing whatever a Vorthon does in private when a thing they were certain of turns out to be uncertain. I thought about my father, sitting in our house in New Mexico, 800 light-years away, waiting for a message he had been waiting 11 years to receive. I raised one hand, not a wave, a slow, deliberate salute, to the chamber, to the walls, to the process that had been long and cold and hard and had eventually, because of its own internal logic, worked. "Thank you," I said, to no one in particular. Ush smiled. This time I was completely certain it was a smile. Earth's seat was a single chair at the far left end of the council floor, the newest addition to a row that had not changed in decades. The chair was smaller than the others. The nameplate was fresh, the lettering not yet worn at the edges. The terminal beside it had been configured for human interface 2 days before my formal swearing-in, which I appreciated, though the default font size was set to something that might have suited a species with much better close-range vision than mine. I fixed the font size myself. That felt like the right way to begin. The first session I attended as Earth's compact ambassador, I said nothing. I had made a decision before I walked into that chamber for the third and final time. I would listen for the first 30 days. Every delegation, every procedural motion, every debate. I would not speak unless directly addressed, and even then briefly. I would learn the room before I tried to change anything in it. Humans are good at watching. We have always survived partly by being very good at reading situations that are not ours yet, at understanding the logic of spaces we are new to. It is a skill built from long experience of being the smallest creature in a given environment. You pay attention when you are small. You notice everything when you do not know which things matter yet. What I noticed in those first 30 days filled more pages of notes than I had accumulated in the entire previous year. I noticed that the Keldras block controlled 3 critical trade route approvals, but depended on 2 smaller delegations for navigational data, and that those smaller delegations were quietly frustrated with how the arrangement had evolved over the past century. I noticed that the Moor Federation's lead ambassador, a careful, methodical being named Sarevroman II, arrived at every session with a set of printed documents in addition to her digital files, which meant she preferred to annotate by hand, which meant she was someone who thought more carefully than she spoke. I noticed that the Tharaki delegation, Riv, had been promoted to full speaking member 2 weeks after the amendment vote, for reasons that were officially unrelated, sat together in a cluster that leaned slightly toward the Drenathi section, a small geography of alignment that said something about where their recent sympathies had settled. I noticed that Sethkal watched me in every session with one set of eyes while his other 2 sets faced forward. I chose to read that as engagement rather than suspicion. It could have been either. On day 32, my first opportunity to speak came not from a grand moment, but from a procedural disagreement about shipping lane jurisdiction in a contested sector near the rim. 2 delegations were presenting conflicting claims. The debate had been going in circles for 2 hours and was heading toward a 30-day review committee that no one seemed enthusiastic about. I raised the speaking indicator. It was a small amber light on the terminal edge, and it was the first time I had touched it. The chamber noticed. The change in attention was physical. I said, "The Velmer Compact records from 60 years ago contain a documented precedent for this type of overlapping claim. The resolution used a shared corridor designation that satisfied both parties' core interests without requiring either to yield primary claim. I can provide the document reference if the chamber would find it useful." A short silence. Sarevroman II of the Moor Federation said, in her careful, measured way, "The chamber would find that useful." The reference was provided. The debate resolved within 40 minutes. The 30-day committee was not convened. It was a small thing, a single piece of information from 4,000 years of reading, applied at the right moment. But the room changed after that. Subtly, not dramatically. The change was in how people looked at me when I raised the amber indicator, not with surprise, with something closer to anticipation. Over the following year, Earth did not become the most powerful voice in the compact. We were one nation among 65. We had one vote on the floor, the same as the Tharaki, the same as the Velmer, the same as species who had been members for thousands of years. That equality was the point. That equality was what Article 7 had guaranteed, and what staying on a stone bench for 3 weeks had made real. What we became, slowly and without announcing it, was useful. Earth knew things, not because we were especially wise, but because we were new, and because being new meant we had read everything before we arrived, and because reading everything means you eventually know where things are. We found old precedents. We remembered provisions that had been forgotten. We connected disputes to resolutions that predated everyone currently in the room. Sethkal and I began meeting monthly in a small conference room off the main corridor, unofficially, over a beverage that was his species' equivalent of tea and my actual tea, both of us adjusting to a relationship that had no proper name. It was not friendship, exactly. Vorthon did not have that concept in quite the way humans did. It was something more structural than friendship and less formal than alliance. Two people who had tested each other in a particular way and found the test worth having taken. "You are not what I expected," he said to me once on one of those evenings. "What did you expect?" I said. "Volatility," he said, "aggression, the traits your history suggested." "We have those," I said honestly. "We have not lost them, but we have learned mostly when to put them down and when they are needed." "The distinction is important," he said. "It is the only distinction that matters," I said. He was quiet for a moment, in the way he had become quiet when he was thinking about something carefully rather than simply waiting to speak. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to understand that I am asking as Sethkal, not as council speaker." "Understood," I said. "When you sat down on that bench at the beginning," he said, "and the chamber laughed, what did you feel?" I thought about it, really thought about it, which is what the question deserved. "I felt like my father," I said. "I felt like every person who ever stood outside a room they should have been allowed into and had to decide, in that exact moment, whether the room was worth the fight or whether they would let the door win." "And you decided it was worth it," he said. "I decided," I said, "that if I left, I would just be one more person who confirmed that we didn't belong here, and I did not want to be that. I wanted to be the thing that proved it was wrong." He regarded me with all 3 eye sets. I had grown used to that. It no longer felt unusual. It felt like the attention of someone who was actually listening. "You have changed this chamber," he said. "Not dramatically, not in ways most would name, but in the way a new element in a compound changes what the compound becomes. I want you to know that I see it." It was the closest thing to a compliment that a Vorthon had ever offered me. I received it the way I imagined a Vorthon would want it received, quietly, seriously, without making it larger than it was. "Thank you, Sethkal," I said. We finished our tea, then we went back to work. The message arrived on an ordinary morning, 14 months after Earth's admission. I was at my terminal reviewing trade proposals when the high-priority alert came through the Compact's communication system. The subject line in standard Compact script said, "Unidentified vessel, outer rim, sector 44, and below that, confirmed faster-than-light capability. Repeat contact attempts unsuccessful. 2 unmanned Compact probes destroyed." I read the message twice. The emergency session convened within the hour. The chamber was full, every delegation present. The Compact's intelligence division gave a brief, tightly worded summary. "An unknown species, newly spacefaring based on the technology signature, had appeared at the outer rim. They were fast. They were armed. They had reacted to the compact probes with immediate and decisive destruction, no communication attempted. The intelligence division assessed them as a high threat profile and recommended a formal military response contingency be drafted within 72 hours. The debate began. I sat at my terminal and listened to 65 delegations weighing military options with the focused, procedural efficiency of people who had done this before. I thought about a stone bench. I thought about a chamber that laughed. I thought about what I had looked like to Seth Call on my first day. Volatile, unproven, new, armed with technology they did not fully understand, reacting to their indifference the way any living thing reacts when it is ignored, with a kind of desperate, clumsy insistence that it exists and matters. I raised the amber indicator. The chamber went quiet. The change in attention that I had learned over 14 months happened again, that shift toward the edge of anticipation. Send me, I said, alone, without military escort, with a diplomatic communication package and a standard translation array. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a room deciding whether to take something seriously. Ambassador Solis, Sarah Vroman II said carefully, the probes were destroyed on contact. Probes are not people, I said. Automated contact with no visible intentionality behind it reads differently than a living being arriving and waiting. I know this because I have done it. Another silence. You are proposing to approach an unknown hostile species, Seth Call said, from his position at the speaker's platform. I am proposing to approach a frightened species, I said. Those are not the same thing. A species that has just achieved faster-than-light travel is new to a universe that is much larger and more populated than they knew. Anything that approaches them without warning looks like a threat. Anything that parks nearby and waits looks like something else entirely. I looked around the chamber, at 65 delegations, at Riv, hovering attentively, at Oosh at her clerk's station, watching me with amber eyes that knew exactly what I was remembering. 14 months ago, I said, there was a species sitting outside this chamber that your automated systems flagged as a non-member presence and attempted to remove. That species did not leave. That species waited and read and talked to people, and eventually found a way in that did not require anyone to get hurt. I paused. I know what it feels like to be the unknown variable that a powerful institution has decided is a threat before taking the time to understand. I know it from the inside. I am, arguably, the only person in this room who does. The chamber was very still. As Seth Call looked at me, all three eye sets. If you go, he said, you go representing the full compact, not Earth alone. I know, I said. If they destroy your vessel, he said, the compact's response options become limited. I know that too, I said. But I also know that a military response, if it goes wrong, creates an enemy that did not have to be won. And I know that the compact was built, at its beginning, by species choosing not to do the easy, violent thing when a harder, better thing was possible. I let that sit in the air of the chamber. Let me try the harder thing first, I said. That is all I am asking. As Seth Call was quiet for a long moment, the chamber was quiet with him. The council will vote, he said. The vote was 41-24 in favor of a diplomatic approach. It was not the largest majority I had ever seen in that room. It was not a comfortable margin, but it was enough. I went back to my quarters and packed the same travel bag I had brought to the conclave 14 months earlier. Same datapad, same ration bars, though I added a few more this time because I genuinely did not know how long this would take. At the bottom of the bag, under everything else, my hand found the half-eaten ration bar from my first week on the stone bench. I had not put it there on purpose. It had simply stayed, migrating from pocket to bag compartment over the months, surviving the way small, persistent things do when no one remembers to throw them away. I held it for a moment. I did not eat it, I put it back. It was not food anymore. It was something else. Proof that a human being had sat on a cold stone bench in an alien chamber and waited, with nothing but time and preparation, and the absolute refusal to believe that a closed door was a permanent condition. Proof that the most powerful thing we ever learned to do was not build faster ships or better weapons. It was decide, in the moment that everything says leave, to stay. I closed the bag. Oosh was waiting in the corridor outside my quarters. She looked at the bag. She looked at me. "Come back," she said. "I intend to," I said. "Bring them with you," she said, "when you do." I smiled. That is the plan. The docking bay was quiet at that hour. My vessel, small, unarmed, marked with the compact's diplomatic insignia, and a human flag I had added myself, sat in its berth with the patience of a thing that had nowhere to be until I put it somewhere. I walked up the ramp. I sat in the pilot's seat. I pulled up the navigation display and found Sector 44 on the map, a long distance into the rim, where a new species was waiting in the dark, fast and frightened and armed. Surrounded by a universe they had not finished learning to read yet. I knew exactly how that felt. I set the course and I flew toward them. In my bag, in the dark of the cargo compartment, the ration bar sat at the bottom of everything, battered and patient, waiting for a story it was already part of to finish being told.